Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, and today we're doing the range DPS countdown, if you want to call it that, in terms of what I believe will be the most fun and interesting stuff to be sticking with as a main class over the course of Warlords of Draenor. This is of course taking into account level 100. The current level 90 stuff is completely imbalanced and broken, and in fact they're patching to try and fix it temporarily until WoD arrives, and also taking into account those wonderful level 100 PvE set bonuses, the only ones we know of. They do have full access to them on the beta, so I've had them and been playing around with them and all that kind of good stuff. Again, this is my personal opinion. I have the distinct advantage of being able to play every single spec. Not everybody gets to do that. And saying which ones I had the most fun on and which ones I found the most boring, blah, 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 blah. Of course, it's not a personal attack. Something has to be last, in my opinion. So if you disagree, that's cool. That's all on you. So far, we've been pretty on the money. Looking at the tank stuff and looking at the healer stuff, we've been pretty bang on. So, without further ado, let's kick off. Number 1. The Mage, the big caster beast, looking very goddamn solid in Warlords of Draenor, it's gotta be said. Wow, it's looking good. I always had a little bit of a with the Mage, because things like Arcane were particularly horrible. I had more fun with certain specs, and they tended not to be viable, all that kind of good stuff. But in Warlords of Draenor, they've certainly picked up the pace a little bit. A lot of focus went into making the Mage really, really good all round, and I'm fully grateful for that. I think everybody should be fully grateful. If you have access to 3 DPS specs, my god, is it easy for Blizz to try and focus on one and ignore the others. And you see these old arguments like, one's for PvP, one's for soloing, blah, 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 blah. But not so. Not so. And surprisingly, the first time ever in the history of World of Warcraft, I had a ton of fun playing Arcane. And that really rounds it out for me. That really gives you the full shebang. The biggest argument, or the biggest downer I gave the Mage in the final looks, was the fact that fire feels antiquated now. It lost a little bit of flair with guaranteed pyroblast coming due to its wonderful perk of making sure that every few fireballs you will get that pyroblast regardless. Lost a little bit of fun, a little bit of flair, but that's okay. That's alright. If your biggest complaint is, hey, the spec where I literally burn everything alive is feeling a little bit old in the tooth, that's fine. That's fine. That's okay. Everything else looking good. Frost is a fucking ton of fun. Really sad to see that we lost the 3 Fingers of Frost procs. That was a little bit sad, but nobody got to play with that really besides a select few of us, and therefore you can't really complain about something you never really had in the first place. But as somebody who did try that, it was glorious. It was absolutely fantastic, and you can see why I thought of that in the very early alpha looks of Frost that we did. The Mage looking fucking awesome. Really good. I enjoy playing it every time I log onto it. I'm now fully confident that every time something becomes more powerful, I'll be more than happy to play it. If fire becomes better, as it currently is, I'll be happy to go fire. If Arcane is, I'll be happy to go Arcane, which is something I've never been able to say, and I'm more than happy with that. In at number 2, the Elemental Shaman, and I know, don't hate me, the Shaman's always so negative. I understand, guys, you've been shouting in the past, I get it, but god is it fun. It really is, and they spent most of the beta just working on Earthquake and making Earthquake work its way into the part of the DPS rotation, which it should be. If you're going to give an AoE spell like that, it should be useful in some fashion. Glad to see it is. Makes it a little bit of a change from what can get very boring of just pure chain lightning spam. Don't know if we scale well beyond that, but it's unlikely due to the buffs that we get from Earthquake, making that really boring aspect of it, which was the AoE for me. I know some people love chain lightning spam, but I think we can all agree if you've been doing it for month on month on month on month on month, it can get a little bit old to just press the one button and just hope for the best. I like the fact that we have that little bit of variation in there just thrown in. Something simple like making Earthquake viable can make all the difference in the world to long-term play and planning and having to think about it, and then getting that little bit of like, tank, stop moving! All that kind of stuff. I actually really enjoy it. Elemental Shaman will probably be my go-to caster. I'm really happy with it. Genuinely really happy with it. I just hope and pray the DPS numbers are good enough. That's all we want to see, is they're good enough. Number 3. Shadow Priest. The Shadow Priest. It's even growing on me as the dotless Shadow Priest spec. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. I don't particularly feel it fits the niche of what the Shadow Priest is all about, but it works, and when you get used to it, it has a real nice pace to it. It really does. As much as I didn't want it, and I was like, oh, I don't want this, and I was in that mindset of like, God, it's dotless Shadow Priest spec, fucking hell. Oh, really? That goes against everything I love about my Shadow Priest. And then you play it more and more and more, and you're like, okay, I kind of see where you're going with this. It's not purely dotless. We still have things to work in. There are places to fall down with it. And on top of that, the other level 100 talents are really nice as well. I like Auspicious Spirits. I like the way it scales up. I like the way gear has an effect, and it moves into doing different things. And we see our spirits go away, and you can turn yourself into this devouring plague turret of justice. And then, of course, a very clever idea by Blizz is the Void Entropy, which is for those who like just the old school classic style, which I think Blizzard is very, very clever in, just in catering to those guys who want that classic style of Shadow Priest, which is just to dot and to be mind blasting and to be mind flaying. I like that. They gave you just an extra dot that lasts a long time. You can go ahead and throw it on, and then the rest of the stuff is just purely classic style Shadow Priest. Something for everyone thrown in there. No doubt something will be more powerful. That's fine. But overall, wonderful. And still carries that wonderful niche moments where you can use your life grip and all that kind of stuff, where you just have these little abilities to speed up the tank and get them going. You can do all these little bits that don't need to be used all the time, but a good player can see when they are useful, can really stand out and shine, and it's important to me that that happens. Right. Below here, it all gets a little bit wonky for me. This is like a big drop. The top three were quite easy for me to say, and then there's like a huge gap between these, so bear that in mind. So number four, just about, is the Balanced Druid. It's incredibly frustrating to me, and it saddens me. If this was the Mr. Pandaria, I would say that Balance was probably my number one or number two, and now Balance is down at number 4. The more I play it in a raid environment, the spec is wonderful and glorious to level. It's an absolute joy to level. I'm sure many of you who are playing Balance have just had a blast with Starfall and then gone into an actual PvE environment and gone, fucking Starfall, bastard. Ruined again, changed again, gotta glyph it, gotta do all this kind of stuff. Don't want to be doing that. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. I've seen people say, well, you know, it makes you a better boomkin if you can really plan out your Starfall. Bullshit. It's either can I pull stuff or not. That is not a skill-based decision, right? That is not a skill-based decision. And Balance is just so frustrating at times. The lack of control, and that's all it's down to, is the lack of control. The new pendulum swinging system means that on occasion, and I pointed this out in a raid I was in the other day, and the other boomkins backed me up, the other people who played it, it's just like, I want to be in solar at this moment, and specifically things like Garish Hellscream, when those ads are gathering early in the fight, I want to be in solar for that. I want to be spreading my Sunfires nice and easily. I will do a ton more damage. I will do so much more damage if it lines up nicely, and guess what? It doesn't all the time, and that's a real pain in the ass, because previously I could guarantee that I would be in the best moment, the best situation, for this situation to occur, and now I can't do that. I am purely at the mercy of my Eclipse Bar. I don't like that. There are occasions I just want to say, Eclipse Bar, stop. Just stop and wait just 5 seconds and I will do so much more damage. But I'm purely at the mercy of it. Other than that though, the Balanced Druid is still really fun to play. The spells are super interesting. The spreading the Sunfire is really good. All these things are very cool. Ursol's Vortex, your fucking Typhoon when needed. All this stuff is great. And plus, Soothe. Soothe is going to be a big part of Walls of Draenor, especially if you're doing heroics and doing challenge modes. Soothe is going to be fantastic. There are several bosses. Beastlaw Darmok, I want to say, in the raid. In the first raid in the Foundry. Needs some very, very specific enrage removal. If your rogues are a bit shit, then of course as a Balanced Druid or any kind of Druid, you can back that up there with your Soothe and really counter some major devastating elements of that fight, which makes the Balanced Druid really good all around. And so that's why it's kind of snuck in there at number 4. But it does have its drawbacks that really frustrate me. Really frustrate me to the point of just like, oh, fuck's sake, man. Just stop, Eclipse Bar. Just stop, because I don't want you to do what you're doing. It's great that you keep moving backwards and forwards. I get it. But please just pause just for a moment, and then I can do so much more damage. I do not like having that control taken out of my hands. At number 5, just about the Warlock. Yeah, way down. My God, did I give this thing praise in Mists of Pandaria. Jesus. I gave this thing a glowing report in Mists of Pandaria. So well designed. The foundation of the Warlock in all 3 specs is so cool. Opposite to the Balanced Druid now, you're purely in control of when you use your most powerful resources. You are totally in control of when you do that. If you look at Destruction, your Chaos Bolts nicely build up to the point when they're going to get maximum effectiveness. Similar with Affliction and similar with Demonology. Now, they are so hurt by the lack of snapshotting. And as much as I understand and totally get why snapshotting has been removed, they have ruined 2 out of 3 of the Warlock specs for me. The loss of things like Skull Banner and all that kind of stuff makes destruction less interesting, to the point where you're just waiting for random trinket procs, and it's like, okay, my trinket proc, now I can cast it. And it becomes very, very dull very, very quickly. Affliction is just horrendous in my opinion. An absolutely awful, awful, awful spec. But we've done many suggestions on how it can be fixed. The saving grace, which is why this is not at the bottom, is of course the glorious Demonology spec, and it's an absolute pleasure to play. An absolute pleasure to play, and I'm hoping and praying that it is going to be one of the dominant Warlock specs in Warlords of Draenor, so when I do jump into raids and stuff, or kind of feel like, oh, I'm going to play my Warlock today, then hopefully I can rock a Demonology Warlock and still be not the Gimp spec. Because there's always a Gimp spec, it tends to happen, and we know it does, and I hope and pray that's the case. And most of you guys seem to be in the same boat, as every raid I go into now is just full of Demonology Warlocks, absolutely adoring it, absolutely finding a newfound passion for a spec that was hurt very badly, I think, by the change to Metamorphosis as not being a cooldown and being something you could drop in and drop out of, and it was very much like, oh, I've got procs and stuff, I'll jump into meta, use my stuff, and then drop out again, and made meta boring. Meta is now so much more interesting. The Demon Bolt makes it that much more interesting again. I can't wait for that to rock in at level 100. Full marks to Demonology, which is why it's the saving grace. I just hope and pray it's worthwhile over the course of the expansion, because the other 2 specs are really lacking, in my opinion. Really, really lacking. And obviously, that leaves the last one. No surprises for most of you who followed the channel for a while, and that would be number 6, the Hunter. And I would like to talk about 3 different specs. I'd like to talk about the variation, but it just does not exist, and that's why it's down at number 6. Is there anything wrong fundamentally with the Hunter? No, absolutely not. Nothing wrong with it whatsoever, but it all feels so the same. So much lack of variation, so much lack of interest. We've talked about the multiple ways the Mage can play, the multiple different ways that even a Shadow Priest can play, the multiple different ways that a Warlock can play. The Hunter has none of that. The talents are all very, very similar. There's no doubt about that. The talents are all very, very similar and all pretty close to each other. And also just the fact that if you go from MM to Survival to Beast Mastery, barely anything changes, if at all. And that's really fucking... God, it's awful, and it would trouble me to play Hunter. I will put this caveat in, though. I do think that the Hunter was due a change that didn't manage to squeeze its way into Warlords, and perhaps we'll see some sort of major changes midway through the expansion. I imagine there is some very, very intense looking going on towards the Hunter in terms of missed boats. They do feel like they missed a boat. They did a huge blog post about the Hunter saying they missed the mark, and hopefully they'll get something done. So maybe ship Warlords, and then they're going to work on the Hunter. Maybe mid-expansion we'll see something. I don't know whether they'll leave it till the next expansion, which is kind of my gut feeling, as they don't like changing the fundamental way a spec works in the middle of an expansion, as it was one of the biggest losses of subscribers, according to players, over the course of Mists of Pandaria. So that's it. It's the Hunter's lack of variety, lack of interest, lack of change, lack of any sort of... I'm a Hunter, I'm fully geared, I kind of want to play around with different things, and they're all kind of play exactly the same. You're just swapping the name of one spell for another. I find that super dull. Super, super dull in my opinion, but that's the way it rocks. There you go, guys. My range DPS breakdown in terms of fun and gameplay. Let's hope the numbers back them up and you guys are happy with that. Apologies to anybody who gets very upset about that. Something has to be last. Something has to be first. All right, guys. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.